Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Cornell Forbes 30 Under 30 event. So excited to be here with you. Excited for all the students, faculty, alums, friends, and family that are here to celebrate this great accomplishment by some of our honorees. I'm Sarah Spain, class of '02 Arts and Sciences. I was the captain and heptathlete at the Cornell track and field team. Now a podcast and radio host, TV personality, and writer for ESPN. And always a proud alumna when I see the Forbes 30 for 30 come out, 30 under 30 come out, and see all these Cornellians on the list, especially since I definitely wasn't one of them. But as a Crain's Chicago 40 under 40, I guess it's something for these, youngsters to aim for, right? This incredible list has 7 Cornellians this year. We have 4 of them with us here today. And we even have, for the first time, Cornell faculty on this list, which is really exciting. So I can't wait to share them with you and talk about their work and their journeys in this great honor for them. We're going to have about an hour here. We're going to do some introductions where you get to know the honorees, and then we'll have a Q&A. I've got a handful of questions prepped, but we also want you all to be able to ask them whatever you have on your mind. So there'll be a chat that you'll be able to enter your questions into, and I'll be able to facilitate throughout the program. So please, as things come to mind, make sure that you're putting those things in the chat and getting your questions in. Lastly, want to thank the sponsors for today's program, the Cornell Entrepreneur Network and Cornell Young Alumni Programs, for putting together this event. And it's being recorded, so you can find it on the Cornell Alumni live stream channel tomorrow to share it with friends and family or those who weren't able to watch. Okay, let's get to our honorees. I'm excited for you to meet them. Big congrats for this newest cohort of the Forbes 30 Under 30 Cornellians. Excited to hear your stories and chat a little bit more. So I'm on a show on ESPN called Around the Horn. So we're going to do a little around the Zoom here and get to know all the folks. Would you share your name, your class, your college, where you're based, and if you're somewhere else right now, and what you do, along with the Forbes list that you're named to? Okay, let's bring up Charles first. Let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charles. I'm class of 2018 in the engineering college, and currently I'm based in New York. I am the co-founder and CTO of Paces. We're a climate tech startup, and we basically help green infrastructures to get built better and faster. So you can think about solar farms, wind farms, EV charging stations, all the way to green road state. We help them to get deployed.
And you help them find the sites and save a lot of time and money looking for the best places to make those connections.
Exactly. So right now, the success rate for a lot of these projects are super low. For solar is less than 20%, for example. We basically help them to build at better places, so their success rate is a lot higher, and the developers won't be wasting millions of dollars every single year.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Okay, we've got a Cornell Tech faculty member coming up next, Nikhil. Tell us all about you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nikhil. I'm a faculty member at Cornell, sort of based at Cornell Tech in operations research and information engineering. And I broadly do research sort of at the intersection of economics, computer science, and data science, sort of to study 2 broad types of societal systems. So one is democratic systems. So, for example, I do a lot of work in crowdsourcing and 311 systems, so like complaints to the local government. And then a lot of work in how do we do recommendations and matching and pricing in online marketplaces.
Awesome. And I saw a lot of your work was in New York, which I'm sure a lot of folks are in, and Chicago, which is where I am. So we're going to get back to that. I want to hear about all the complaints you're fixing here in my city. All right, let's get to our next faculty member. Allison, you're up next.
Hello, I'm Allison Koenigke. I'm an assistant professor at Cornell in the Ithaca campus and a collaborator of Nikhil's. A lot of my work is applying computational tools, so things like machine learning and causal inference, to study fairness, specifically things like algorithmic fairness in online services or societal fairness and public health. So I'm looking forward to chatting with everyone more today.
Yeah, this is fascinating because this is intersecting with my industry of sports as well, how the internet is learning from our own bias and then it's affecting the way things are done. Awesome, really fascinating work. Last but not least, let's go to Marissa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marissa Sergi Schumann. I'm the CEO of Uvabella Winery. I graduated from Cornell Cows in 2015, studying winemaking there, and really grasped my passion for winemaking on campus. And Uvabella produces wines for the everyday consumer across 10 states and growing. We're one of the fastest growing women-owned wineries in the Midwest, and really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Well, let's just start with you since you closed us out here. You actually started your own winery while you were attending Cornell. How do you have the time to do that? And what was the inspiration and what was your background to know that you'd be able to get a head start on everyone before graduation?
Well, I was inspired because I was afraid to not graduate. I came from a very small town with only 1,600 people. I graduated from a class in high school of 53 people, including myself. So when I got to campus, I was very overwhelmed, and I felt like I had to really work hard to be at the same shoulder to shoulder with my peers. I didn't even have AP courses where I'm from. So it was very overwhelming. And when I discovered that you had to create a capstone project to graduate, knowing that that project is between me and success, it was very intimidating. So after talking to at some conferences and some seniors that were doing the capstone, I decided to start a wine label and do my research project around that, create the wine, create the label, see how I could bring it to market. And that's how I got started. And I was just really passionate about creativity and making something from nothing and combining that with my winemaking interests. And it all came together from there.
That's awesome. I know a lot of us after graduation, we're like, why didn't we take classes and stuff like wines? What were we doing going to all the ones just for our majors? So very cool that you applied it. All right, let's bring everybody up and get to some of these questions. I'm going to start with some of the questions that I brought today, and then we'll start to get the questions from everybody on the live stream. I want to start with the fun stuff because I'm sure the news of hearing that you're a Forbes 30 under 30 is a particularly fun thing to hear. So let's start with you, Allison. What's it like to get the news, and what does it mean to you to get this honor?
It means a lot. It's a lot of really nice validation of the work that we've been doing on the research side of things. The first thing I did actually was there's a group chat that I have with Nikhil and our colleague and friend Emma Pearson, who actually is also a 30 under 30 awardee, although I think she got it before she officially started her Cornell professorship position. So the three of us kind of all got to be happy about our shared successes and just be very happy that our research is something that the broader public cares about.
That's a very smart group chat. I don't think most of my group chats are quite as honored. Nikhil, how about you? How'd you get the news?
How did I get the news? I think I got I was checking my email in the morning, and I think I got an invite to a Slack group before they sent the actual notification. So I think I was confused is how I got the news. But then I think maybe I told Allison, I don't know if she actually checked her email before I did.
Yeah.
I think no, Allison has better Googling skills. So I think then she Googled around.
She probably had a Google alert on with her name. So as soon as the news hit, she's got it. She knows how those algorithms work. Nikhil, what does it mean for the research that you're doing and that you're working on, even with Allison and others, to have this and be able to point to it when you're talking to folks about funding or access or anything else?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I think the nature of the work that we do, especially I do with New York City agencies and others, is it's a lot of outside facing and trying to convince people to either share data or to work on something together, or to implement something that we've been working, or just just to talk to me. And so it's great internal academic credit, our publications and all the the internal academic stuff that we get is often not, it's very opaque to folks on the outside. So this is one of those, small things that I think people not in academia understand.
100%. The name Forbes and the list go a long way for pretty much every industry. Charles, how about you? How'd you find out, and what does it mean for the work you're doing?
Yeah, so pretty similar to Nico. I mean, I just received an email in the morning about a Slack group, and yeah, that's sort of how I found out. And yeah, it's actually a really good honor for, I think, especially like in the old industry like energy, because we do a lot of green energy, and yeah, it's a good badge to have because it definitely provides some sort of credibility. Sometimes it has a lot on sort of the growth side of things, where we're sort of selling the software because we're a B2B SaaS company. So yeah, it's definitely very beneficial for us.
You're kind of in a different world, Marissa, but I'm certain that even the wine world can respect and recognize a Forbes 30 under 30, especially, I want to hear about how you're growing up. Your parents have a winery, yes, and that's the one you took over. So how do you sort of learn from growing up in that, and what do you see that you want to do differently?
Yes. So my father, Frank Sergi, started Livabella in 2005. And just throughout my entire life, friends and family would be involved with the family tradition of winemaking. My grandparents immigrated here from Italy and brought that over with them. So lots of fond memories with being involved with that. Even if I was 6 years old, I wasn't that helpful, but still tasting the juice and seeing everyone come together was fun. But with establishing Livabella, I was able to see what potential there was in the industry. And with research, I found that Cornell did offer the viticulture enology degree. So I thought, great, I can professionalize my passion and see if I can get involved. But with the capstone I mentioned earlier, launching a label called Redhead, which I recently rebranded to Reds, I found that my true passion in the industry was really creating and sharing wines on shelves for all to enjoy. So with that experience, I built the distribution company at Livabella to bring the products to multiple states. And in 2020, my now husband, Evan Schumann, who's also on the list with me, we fully acquired the business from my parents so they could retire. I didn't want to do succession. I wanted to write my own story and have a little more control. And we've been off to the races since. We took the business from 3 states to now in 10 states since then.
Wow, that's fantastic. Since you're the only person here that can actively sell us anything, give us one wine from the label that we should all be looking for and buying. What's your favorite?
I have to say my favorite is the Reds Red Blend. It's a Malbec and Zinfandel from California. It's lightly sweet, lightly spicy, just like a redhead.
Perfect. She's even got the sales pitch down.
Yeah, I hope so.
Charles, I want to ask about the industry right now, like some of the biggest trends going on that you're keeping an eye on or working on.
Absolutely. So I think the energy industry is currently under a massive transition with the US climate bill and the IRA passing off, that a lot of the money are actually pouring into the space. Like historically we've been seeing, already quite a lot of green PE, where some of these, on the finance side of things, having money on the table, but they were unable to find good projects to actually invest in, because the deployment is actually the biggest bottleneck we believe right now. And with the IRA and all the US climate bills, it's even going to make this situation it's going to be more overwhelming. Essentially, we're going to see like a massive land grab in the next like couple years, and turn lands into like renewable energy sites and things like that. So we really want to basically help accelerate the green energy transition and have most of the US energy powered by solar farms or wind farms, things like that, than the traditional coal plant. Yeah, so that's sort of the current trend of the industry.
Well, and it feels like that's why your work is so important, because not only do you want millions of dollars pushed into a space that's necessary and wasted because it's not done correctly, but you also want success stories that will hopefully be imitated by other places. And if too many people do it wrong initially, it can then be misinterpreted as a field that shouldn't be pursued, right? Or as a solution that shouldn't be invested in. So for you particularly, what's your groundbreaking idea, or what has separated you from the rest of the people in the field that Forbes is recognizing here?
Yeah, so I think sort of how I started Pace as my co-founder was we really want to work on something that brings the most sort of climate impact. And after, doing a lot of talking in the space, talking to developers, operators, investors, we find out that deployment is actually the part that's the most broken right now. And that's the part we kind of want to fix, because energy, is one of the, energy, agriculture, and construction. These are the sort of the three most emissions in the world right now. And obviously we want to help energy to become a lot greener. We want to work on something that shapes the physical world in a somewhat climate positive way, compared to some of the other work in the space more focusing on virtual stuff.
Yeah, that's very cool. Allison, I want to talk about your work because the week before we first chatted about doing this Zoom, I was looking at a new project in the sports world that addresses the fact that the internet learns from us and in turn often spits back out information that's incorrect. Now, we all know the internet is full of disinformation, but sometimes when you Google something, your expectation is that you're going to get back facts. But in the sports world, if you Google who has the most international goals in football, you're going to get Cristiano Ronaldo, even though the answer is Christine Sinclair, because our own bias about men and women in sports has impacted the results you're getting back. That's pretty important for people like me in my world, but there are far bigger implications to the internet learning from our bias and then not giving back actual facts and information, and how that affects any number of things is sort of one of the things you focus on. So what are some of the trends in your industry that you're looking at, especially in terms of the algorithms and the way they work?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a fantastic example that hopefully I'll bring up in class sometime. So a lot of my work focuses on fairness in different online systems. So things like speech to text or recommendation systems. And in particular, when you think about these systems, they're all trained on data. Where does the data come from? Oftentimes the internet, right? Which, as you mentioned, has this kind of hodgepodge of some true, some not great, different demographics that are being represented on the internet, that sort of thing. So the particular issue that I study with speech-to-text systems, so things like Alexa or Siri, is that a lot of these big tech companies are using user data to feed into these systems. But the issue is if these speech systems only work for white speakers and not necessarily speakers of African-American vernacular English, for example, then there's just going to be an increasing number of speakers who are speaking quote unquote standard English, and just really poor performance of ASR technologies, of automated speech recognition technologies, on individuals who are speaking maybe non-native English or different variants of English and varieties of English, which account for a massive share of the US population. And so looking at those downstream biases that feed from, for example, disproportionate representation on the internet of speech samples that you can use to train your speech models, and this disproportionate kind of feedback loop you have going on with user data really leads to a lot of these downstream biases that have really important societal impact. So you might think like, oh, actually, it doesn't really matter if you can't use Alexa. It's like I use Alexa to set a timer or do these kind of small scale tasks. But actually, these feed into really big, important systems. So, for example, individuals with disabilities rely very heavily on speech to text technologies. There are a lot of handheld devices that doctors actually use that are specifically trained on medical jargon. But if those aren't transcribing your patient notes correctly for some doctors, then that can have massive health impacts downstream. And another example that I've in the last year I've been learning more about is in the criminal justice system. There are some companies out there that are using speech to text in order to surveil incarcerated people's phone calls and basically use the ensuing transcriptions to decide whether individuals should go into solitary confinement, for example. And so aside from the obvious kind of surveillance issues there, part of the issue is that people tend to think, oh, well, we're using this technology and the technology can't be racist, therefore we are not racist. But it turns out that the technology is, basically just what we put into it, and what we're putting in right now is some very biased data. And so it's really important to look into those biases, both in the data itself, in the model itself, and in the entire pipeline, just to make sure that we can have more equitable outcomes across the board.
It's fascinating and so wide reaching. I think people don't really quite fully grasp how much our bias going into the technology that we use can deeply affect people. And some of your work was even on nutrition assistance programs that, as it turned out, despite being, run through this technology, was making it less likely for Spanish-speaking people to take advantage. So there's any number of applications. You're going to make me want to deep dive on that because I think it's so interesting. Nikhil, I want to talk about this specific work that you're doing and what part of it you think Forbes recognized and wanted to honor.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll sort of, maybe I'll tell a story that's just sort of, jumping off exactly what Allison said. Sort of these sort of data biases are there, sort of, especially the popular media around machine learning and AI is always sort of the development of the algorithms and sort of the large computational power they use. But sort of, at least I think, and I think Allison would agree based on what she just said, is sort of the data inputs and are sort of the bread and butter and sort of the most important thing there. And so sort of, the stuff that I do, perhaps that's most relevant is to sort of think about, how, very mundane things like sort of how do things get fixed in cities, right? So like in New York, there's there's 800,000 trees lining the streets. There's like, something like millions of miles of road. There's not million, there's some extremely large number of miles of road. They're just like, all this housing, all of these things that the city just has to maintain and sort of take care of and sort of build on a daily basis. And in New York, but actually, in about 100 cities throughout the US and all around the world, sort of the number one way these things are sort of the city knows about it. It's like, it's not real-time 24/7 video surveillance of the entire city. It's like mundane of like who's complaining about problems, right? So, who's complaining about the pothole on their street. And so New York has a system called 311. They receive about 3 million complaints a year at this point. And this is like the primary way the government's learning about problems and decides what's to fix. But sort of as soon as you frame it that way, it's sort of exactly the type of data biases that Allison was talking about is sort of who's, squeaky wheel gets the grease, but sort of now on a massive city scale, sort of who's complaining about issues, sort of how quickly are they complaining once an issue rises up, what's the severity level of the issues that they end up complaining about, sort of that seeps through downstream in what the city ends up working on in a very measurable way. And so we're trying to sort of understand and counter sort of these sorts of biases and through, a mix of statistical and algorithmic techniques.
I just pictured a whole bunch of like Karens complaining about a crack while this other area has like a issue with running water and how that would manifest in the complaints and the way it's dealt with, which is, it's fascinating. Gosh, I would not want to be on the other end of 311 in Chicago. I'll tell you that, knowing all the things. Douglas Ford is joining us today, and he asks, how did your age factor into the success of your field? And did you ever feel intimidated given your age or maybe empowered because of it? Marissa, let's start with you. Winemaking, there's a lot of history that's just inherent in the work. And how were the expectations for you in terms of, do you know enough and have you been around enough to be a part of this world?
Absolutely. Especially when I first started getting really involved in distribution. It was a little intimidating to walk into a room with mostly male colleagues making decisions. I felt that sometimes I did not get taken seriously, but I realized that I could be judged on my appearance, my age, but no one could take away my education, my preparedness, my facts, my data coming into the meeting. So knowing that I prepared and knowing I was adding value for all parties involved, it gave me the confidence that I knew I earned my place in the room, and I was able to get over that feeling and to prove that I knew what I was talking about. So I kind of used it to my advantage in a way, knowing it could have been and was a disadvantage.
Yeah, preparedness, that's it, right? It's like if you know that you know your stuff and you walk into a space, it's almost like you look forward to surprising them and their reaction when you're actually, ready to go, even at a young age. Allison, what about you?
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword. I think at Cornell, especially among my peers, among the faculty, there is no issue. Everyone is really respectful of each other, and all of our different research expertise really shines through. So I think that age has not been kind of any sort of professional concern on that front. I would say the funnier thing is kind of in the wild on campus being people assume I'm a student, which is a fair assumption sometimes. And the other one is sometimes from the student side. Some students, I think, see the younger female professor and think that I might be easier to kind of talk a grade up from like a B+ to an A-, whereas they wouldn't try the same thing with like a middle-aged professor. So that might be one of the bigger differences. But on that, not too much of a hindrance, I think, to my overall career.
Yeah, we all loved the young teachers, though. They were all so much cooler. We all felt like we could connect with them. Nikhil, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give like the sappy version of the same answer in the sense that like sort of, of course, like academia, I think has a lot of, other cultural things that, we hear about in media and so on. But like, it's like maybe the only industry where like the entire purpose is to like educate younger people and like, train them to like go out and do the world, go do cool things. Like in energy and in wine and so on, right? So like, I think because it's sort of even in PhD, sort of even in academia and sort of at the research level, it's like, it is an apprenticeship model at the end of the day where, older faculty are, have PhD students who are, in their 20s usually, not just in their 20s, but sort of, junior academically and often age-wise as well. So yeah, I think for that reason, in many senses, it's like, it is the norm to sort of to have this across ages. And then, I think, sort of, I don't have like the gender aspect of Allison in the sense of like, I'm maybe not, students don't treat me that way in the same way, but, I grow a beard and I make jokes about how old I am in class to try to counter that further.
Charles, what about you? It's an emerging industry where I think people might even respect more the opinions of young people who are looking to their own futures, perhaps even more, and the importance of renewable energy.
Yeah, actually, at first it was a little bit intimidating for me because not only about my age, but also about the space in general. It's a pretty deep space. It took me a while to actually learn about the basics about energy, learn what is a three-phase line, learn what is a substation and all of that. But I think, as time goes on, as I start to learn all the basics and knowing sort of the basic terminologies of the industry, I start to form my own view as well. And I think it actually becomes like an advantage because people in the industry has been used to solve a lot of these problems in the same way in the past like 10, 20, 30 years. And we come in and we sort of like bring a very different perspective. And a lot of times it's sort of like applying a lot of the technologies or methodologies we used in other spaces such as finance or AI into the energy space and really bridge the gap. So I think in the end, it really becomes like an advantage for me.
Yeah, it's about that fine line of like understanding what you don't know and haven't had the experience to know, but also leaning into the way your perspective and how it might be different is useful in spaces that have gotten antiquated or in spaces that need to see things differently. I'm going to paraphrase Elizabeth Mahood's question because we covered it a little bit, but I think what she's getting at is how do you get noticed by the Forbes 30 under 30? What part of what you did do you think made you stand out? And maybe even more logistically, do you have someone apply for you? Do you send your stuff out? What do you think sets you apart? And we'll start with you, Allison.
Sure. So I think on our end, a lot of people don't necessarily think of academics as the usual kind of demographic of people who are doing this 30 under 30 stuff. It's mostly like, startups and founders. But at the end of the day, a lot of being a professor is actually quite similar to running a startup. So you have to go find your own funding. You have to kind of grow your lab from the ground up. You have to set your research direction. And on top of all of that, fundraising and kind of speaking with the media about your work and all of that, you also have to teach, and you also have to review papers and do a lot of mentorship and all of these other things. So it's actually quite, I think, a similar kind of analog to being in startup land. And so it seems like it would be a good idea to have more academics represented. As I already mentioned, Emma Pearson, who was also a lister, is the one who nominated me. And so very much appreciate her help there.
Awesome. What about you, Charles?
Yeah, so I think what we're working on PACE is definitely something that's, pretty new and pretty interesting. So I think that's something that's probably played like a really big factor. And also because we're in YC, Y Combinator during the summer, and that sort of brought a little bit of media. We also had we have a friend who actually writes on Forbes quite a lot. So he basically wrote us an article, and like we did an interview with him, and he wrote down sort of from our point of view, what are the biggest problems in the industry and how PACES is trying to solve that. So I think a lot of that really helped with, I guess, like just getting connected with Forbes.
Yeah, getting on their radar. How about you, Marissa?
Definitely having your work show for itself, especially in CPG. It's easy to apply. I know that there's a lot of applications that come through, but for what I'm trying to do and what we've done at Lupabella, just sharing our successes with the retailers and using LinkedIn as a tool on social media, just to showcase that what we did say is 100% true in the application, because Forbes, I think, had over 20,000 or 10,000 applications this year. So being able to cut through the clutter with what you've been able to grow with your business, but showcase that you do have media, or you're posting that you did get into Target in these states, etc. So it kind of helps them with the vetting process, because with media today, it's easy to really dig deep and find that not everything is the truth. So I was very careful with how I reported what we've done, because I wanted everything to really line up and showcase. So when they did give their attention, they're like, oh yeah, it makes sense, looks great, they're really growing, and would love to include them.
Yeah, we don't want a George Santos situation at the Forbes 30 under 30, right? Person's like 52 years old, everything's made up. Marissa, what's CPG?
Consumer packaged goods.
Okay, got it. Just making sure every single industry has its own, and I'm in the sports world, so I've got all the weird ones, but I don't know all the basics. But like P&L, what is that? It's my husband always makes fun of it. We all have our own different vernacular. What about you, Nikhil, in terms of getting noticed, getting on the radar? Is it as simple as that same gal that Allison knows is just putting in for all the research you guys are doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of getting nominations, or sort of Emma, and then sort of another faculty member, David Schmoyes, sort of submitted nominations for me. So yeah, I think sort of it's one, of course, like Marissa said, doing good work, and then two, sort of making sure someone nominates you.
Yeah. Douglas Ford again, but this time he has a middle name, Douglas William Ford. I think it's the same person, but he just got a little bit more professional with us here with the middle name. He wanted to know about the rise of AI, namely things like ChatGPT and how they impact your field. And Allison, we talked about this on the call last week in particular. It's a whole nother reason to care about bias or disinformation, yes?
Absolutely. And this is a big one that kind of everyone at Cornell seems to be talking about now for a good reason. On the kind of purely professional, not even thinking about my research kind of thread, ChatGPT is something that the administration sent out a big email blast to all the professors being like, you need to add something about ChatGPT to your syllabus, because all of the students are going to start using ChatGPT to write essays, and you have to be careful when grading student essays and that sort of thing. So already in terms of impacting the field in the sense of education, and how do we make sure that students actually learn and write their own work, as opposed to having ChatGPT come in and do the work for them, is one big question. There is, of course, the counterpoint to, Do you need to learn how to write from scratch if everything in the future is just going to be prompt based? So how do you write a good prompt for ChatGPT? So I think that's going to be kind of an interesting thing to keep an eye on going forward. As far as the research side of things go, I think a lot of other folks in the kind of fairness research space are very concerned about the ethics of ChatGPT, kind of where the lines are drawn in terms of what sorts of prompts these sorts of AIs will actually respond to, whether there will be misinformation. And so I think a lot more work needs to be done on kind of making sure those guardrails are in place, making sure that regulation comes out in a similar way to, for example, facial recognition kind of regulation, in terms of making sure that these sorts of AI technologies don't perpetuate biases downstream.
As a professional writer, I say yes, we should still all know how to write things. And having read some of the articles about initial forays into seeing if ChatGPT will write like your memoir or your essay for you, and watching the weird and crazy twists and turns it can take, I would recommend still doing it yourself. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating to consider how difficult it might be, and how increasingly difficult it might be to tell when something is authentic versus having been produced. I mean, with AI, sometimes what often happens is somebody has like 6 fingers, and that's how you realize that that's been a fraudulent photo about whatever it is that someone needs propaganda for. But it's not as simple in situations of something like research or essays. Charles, is AI and ChatGPT, is that affecting your industry?
Yes, I think it is becoming to become like it basically becomes like a very big part of the future. I don't think it's ChatGPT or sort of NLP AI models in general, but more sort of AI as a whole, because the space right now has very disaggregated data. So we have, environmental data, interconnection data, all these random data from different sources, and the data are dirty, and our customers also, they don't have the technical ability to aggregate all these data and use them. So what we've been doing a lot is doing a lot of data aggregation, cleaning up the data, making sure that data is in a good shape so that the customers can make sense and do actions on top of the data. But where we really want to go is actually building analytics or some sort of insights on top of the data we have after we aggregate all these data. So I really believe that, this is where the industry should go. And this same or similar methodology has been applied in many other industries in the past, like 10, 20, 30 years, but it's just nobody have ever really done too much about this in the energy industry. So yeah, I do think that AI will play like a very big role in the future.
Marissa, in the creators world, there's always this idea of being able to save on things like design, websites, label design, drawings, things like that. And there's a conflict. There's even a AI model who is completely created from AI. She does not exist, but she's being used in some campaigns. And, that affects the work of designers and artists and everything else. Is there an intersection in your world, or are you sticking with going to local artists and things for your labels and such?
Yes, absolutely. I'll always consider to look in that direction to continue to innovate and do something unique. But our story is rooted in family tradition and being authentic. And anytime I can use a local graphic designer or artist, or incorporate something super genuine into our artwork and how we convey our products, is really something I like to prioritize. But as the world and society and this industry innovates, we want to also be there. So looking at how we can combine both of those worlds in the future is something that we'll definitely be looking into.
Cool. Allison, what's the best advice you would give a recent graduate in your field?
Oh, that's so tough. At the same time, I feel like I have so much advice, and also it's like, what is even relevant now with ChatGPT, now that we've been talking about that? I think so here's a very concrete piece of advice that I like giving my students who I work with, because I think it's super important in both kind of how you think about things and also how you communicate with others. But it's to always write numbered lists, never use like bullet points in emails. That way you always have a rank ordering of like, what is the most important thing to do? Then when someone responds to your email, they can respond to point 1, 2, or 3 and not have to like do the copy paste of the bullet points. So an oddly specific one, but I think one that's carried me far in life, always use numbered lists.
Yeah, very good. That's actually something people can put into play immediately. Nikhil, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of, I think this is a generic answer, but I think it sort of the same answer appears everywhere, which is sort of like it's pretty important, I think, to find the intersection of your interests and skill sets and with what you want to do. In that, like, sort of, I had, I think, like a moment in grad school where I was like, am I amongst the top 100 mathematicians on this campus? Probably not, right? But and a lot of computer science algorithmic research ends up being applied math. But like, does that mean the work that I'm doing is like not good, or sort of like I need to be doing the same kind of work that amongst the top 100 mathematicians on campus would be doing? And like the answer there is, I think, clearly no as well. And so I think for me, it's sort of, yeah, maybe a riff on that is like sort of as much as like make lists for like the types of things you want to do. It's also useful to have like no lists, like sort of types of things you don't want to do and that are not going to be your focus.
Yeah. As someone over 30, just a few years, I will tell you that the further away you get from those nascent ideas of what you're going to be and who you should be, you get a lot closer to what am I meant to be, which is a combination of what you love and you're passionate about and what you're good at. It's harder to define when you're younger because so many people are putting onto their expectations for you. But there's a lot less judgment about what you should be doing versus what your natural and clear path is based on what you're passionate about and what drives you. So I think that's great advice to start looking at really early on too, is that intersection. Charles, what's your best advice for recent graduates in your field?
I think it's a good question, but I would say for people who want to work as software engineers or who wants to work in tech in general, like prioritize learning is definitely like a very good thing to do, because the industry is it moves so fast. Like ChatGPT, like a year ago, maybe nobody ever heard about it, but now it's such a big thing, right? I think just like not really like following all the trends, like have your own view on the trend itself, but like really open to learn new things and like be open about it. I think that is definitely like a very good trait to have.
Read about Bitcoin, don't buy Bitcoin is basically what Charles is telling us. Be aware, don't jump at everything. Marissa, what about you?
Try to get involved in as many things as you can that interest you or you think may interest you. When I was an undergrad, I took various courses that may not have related to my field just to see what that could lead to, or just getting involved with the hospitality aspect of things. So I spent a lot of time at the hotel school, and that really opened up my experience and network and shaping what I really wanted to do in my focus. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there, and you'll learn a lot about yourself and learn a lot in general.
I love that too. I think some people are so focused on whatever goal they have that they limit everything they do and all of their time to pursuing it, and ultimately become less well-rounded, less interesting, less likely to be able to chat with someone at a meeting that could be a really potentially big investor or collaborator because they are not interesting or not compelling in any way other than that thing that they've decided to obsess about. That's great advice to stay kind of multifaceted and keep yourself engaged in other things. I want to ask this one that I love asking on my podcast, and I love asking successful people, which is, how has failure played a role in what you've done? Because usually on these calls, all we talk about is how great everybody is and how everything's been so easy breezy. But usually, even the most successful among us have had adversity or failings. So, Charles, can you think of something that was a setback or something that you now look back and say, okay, I messed that up, but I learned from it?
A lot of things. But I would say like it is like failure is a very important role, especially if you work in sort of startups or tech in general, because I feel like a lot of the things that you can only learn it from doing it. For example, before PACES, I've tried so many different things where I tried to create games with friends, I tried to create social apps. And I think a lot of these, like the learnings, it really comes from just like, trying things out and like failing and like learning from the failures, right? For example, with, like a social app I tried to start, we got no traction. In the end, we found out that there's not really a problem there. So I learned that, okay, like if I want to work on something next time, I probably should work on like a real world problem than like trying to create a problem and then solve that. So yeah, I would say that failure is definitely a very important piece in my journey.
Well, ultimately, your entire company PACES is based on people's failures. Failure, right, to find the right site and use it correctly. And so you're like, all right, you guys are all failing. Let me help you out with that. So very direct connection for you. How about you, Nikhil?
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of like, I think, something to recognize for all of, both successes and failures is just like how much of them are like completely random. Like sort of like, I guess for the theme of the panel is like, were we any more deserving than like the next 1,000 people who were nominated and didn't get it? Like probably not, right? It was like sort of there's like, if you like repeat, and there's been experiments done in like sort of academia, like conference submission settings where like they'll just run through the same conference review process twice in parallel, and then like what is the intersection of papers that got accepted to both? Actually fairly little, right? And it's sort of like a lot of the acceptances in each were pretty random. So I think sort of just like having this mindset that both sort of it's like the luck favors the prepared mind sort of thing, which is like you can decide how you can control how many lottery tickets sort of your work is going to get, but like at the end of the day, the actual success or failure is probably out of your control.
Right. Well, you control only so much of it, right? Not that it's out of your control entirely, but you only control so much of it, and not to get too high about the highs or too low. It's like my trolls on Twitter. It's the ones who are really mean, get rid of them. The ones who think it's the greatest thing ever, I probably have to get rid of them too. They're probably also delusional. Somewhere in the middle is probably where you should be focused for your work. And I think that's great advice. Pursue those high points like the Forbes 30 under 30, but don't let it get to your head. What about you, Marissa?
I've learned to cherish the small things and to understand that even if things aren't great or bad, enjoy it too, because I found that when it rains, it pours. Usually if something negative happens or you fail, it just all comes crashing down at once. So it really makes you appreciate all the highs in the neutrals, if that makes sense. But I always try to find a silver lining with all my failures. What lessons can I learn? What could I showcase for it? And how do I not repeat that history?
Yeah. Allison, have you ever failed at anything?
Constantly. And I will say academia is actually great at giving like very quick responses for when you're failing. So with paper submissions, and I think me and Nikhil are both very much recipients of many paper rejections, followed by eventually paper acceptances, right? And so I think one thing I take away, especially in the academic context of failures, is you can always learn something from it. So even if your paper gets rejected, it necessarily has to come with some reviewer feedback in terms of why they didn't like the paper, or how you could improve upon the methods that you're using. And so just iterating from those failures and hopefully eventually converting them into successes, I think it is the way to go. And the other point I want to make is echoing Nikhil's point about how much kind of randomness has to play into things. My grad school journey was very nonlinear because my advisor left Stanford, and so I was left without an advisor for a while. And so these sorts of kind of life things often just happen. And in sort of a timely fashion, I do want to flag for anyone who is currently applying to PhD programs and waiting to hear back, or finding out that they got rejected from programs. I just want to put out there that so much of this is just kind of constraints on bandwidth or luck or randomness. It is not about you. It's just about the fact that sometimes these constraints happen and you got to roll with the punches and hopefully apply next year and keep trying.
Yeah. Vikrant wants to know some emerging technologies that everyone's excited about, and are there actionable steps for keeping up with it? I think that's important. Are there places or resources that you use to make sure that you're keeping up to date? Maybe Charles?
Emerging technologies. That's a very good question. I think for me, it's not really a technology, but I think the climate space in general is very, very interesting and something that I'm like personally very excited about. And it is a very complex problem. So if you're a natural problem solver, like you'll be attracted to it. It is a very complicated problem. It involves a lot of different pieces, like technology, government, finance, all these different pieces. And it is a burning problem that, we'll have to solve in the next like decade, 2 decades. So if you're interested, highly recommend just joining a bunch of the climate communities like My Climate Journey, Air Miners, things like that. Those are really good starting points.
Nikhil, how about you? Are there resources you use to try to keep up with what's coming out and what's new?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at one point it used to be Twitter. I don't know how well that's holding up.
Now that we've hit our daily limit and we can't follow anyone or send DMs as of yesterday's implosion.
Yeah, no, but I think the nature of our job in academia is sort of exactly to sort of to be sort of, in some sense not following, the sort of what's it called, the something of the day, the whatever's hot right now. But at the same time, sort of, especially in engineering department, sort of, we want to be setting the foundation to like, what are the sorts of technologies that can succeed in the next 5-7 years, and what is the type of work that, foundational research that needs to happen today for that. And so like, I think the thing that I'm excited about that sort of, I'm not currently working on, but sort of especially with an electrical engineering background, I sort of see myself working on very soon, is actually exactly what Charles said, is sort of climate technologies, and that sort of like all of the attention and sort of work that's gone into online marketplaces and like recommendation systems and like pricing and sort of dealing with like decentralized strategic actors, sort of all of that is now going to play out in the physical world with sort of decentralized renewable technologies, right? Is like when we have at far larger scale, sort of people, generating electricity at home and then sending it to the grid and all of that. So I think sort of trying to take all the algorithmic learnings that from online marketplaces into that setting is, I think, exciting to me in the coming years.
Allison, so much of your work is emerging technologies and how to work with them or against them. Is there something in particular, or is there somewhere that you use to keep up?
So similar to Nikhil, is kind of part of our job to constantly be on top of the new emerging things. So reading the new papers that are coming out, going and listening to folks' seminars and presentations from all sorts of domains, not just in InfoSci, but also in other fields, is something that I think we regularly do as parts of our jobs, and is one of the most exciting parts of our jobs. I will say, to directly answer the question, my kind of controversial take is I'm actually not excited about any specific emerging technologies. I'm excited about the idea of taking technologies that already exist and applying them more equitably across the world, right? So for example, we have all of these so much progress in large language models, but most of that progress is in English, right? And for low resource languages, there are very little resources being dedicated to improving language models on that front. Or for example, with VR, AR type stuff, and you have all of these fancy headsets and they seem really cool, but at the price point that they're just not accessible to the vast majority of people. And so if you want to think about all of these kind of human VR interactions, it's not realistic unless if you find a way to make these technologies more accessible. So my pitch is, it's great to care about emerging technologies. It's really exciting, but I think we have a lot of work to do first in order to get a lot of the existing technologies to be kind of present all over the world.
Yeah. Marissa, how about you? Anything in your field?
Right now, what is most exciting is some of the new RTDs that are coming out, ready to drink cocktails or seltzers. But for us at the winery, we are looking to innovate with our throughput technologies, with implementing filtration systems and better tank capacity that integrates way better with what we're trying to do when it comes to finding efficiencies when producing our products. So we've invested pretty heavily with new equipment and some of the innovation we found in that space, which we've been able to reduce the cost of production, where a lot of our global conglomerate competition has had to increase their products $1 or $2 retail. We've been able to maintain, if not lower, our pricing just to really give back to the customer, and look how we were able to innovate with those types of activities.
Cool. Very cool. We're coming up on the end here. And so I have a last question for all of you. And I'm hoping the audience is paying attention here, because if they can be of any help, we would love to put their info in the chat, and they can share it with the folks running this program, and we can connect some of you with these great honorees. Because the question is, if you had to name one thing that would be helpful right now for your career trajectory, what would it be? And again, maybe someone in the chat can help. So be thinking out there if you can be helpful here and make a great connection. Marissa, let's start with you.
This is a hard one. And the first thing I came to mind, to be honest, was a magic ball to see my future.
Right. Maybe just getting rid of dry January as like a thing would be helpful for your career. That seemed like it was that was an unfortunate viral trend this year. I went with moist January. It was a good compromise.
I mean, I always respect people's decisions and what they want to do with their bodies. You know, if they don't want to consume alcohol, totally support it. But for me, I enjoy my occasional glass of wine. But, you know, any way that I could find to efficiently communicate my growth, my data to grow into more retailers and states, that would be great. But really, things are very traditional in this industry when it comes to relationships and growth. So again, I hate to go to it, but just a magic crystal ball to see what my future holds so I can make better decisions.
I love it. Charles, how about you?
I would say that probably like build a grain infrastructure myself, like deploy like a solar farm or wind farm or something like that. I think that'll be super cool, and that will help me sort of learn about the space even deeper and really go end to end. Because right now, you know, like we're creating solutions for these developers, but you know, our team, none of us have ever built like a solar farm or a wind farm or a battery storage site in our lives. So that would be something that could be super cool, I think.
All right. So your connections are, you need land, you need money, you need developers. All right. Everyone who's listening, Charles needs all those connections. So let's get it out there. Nikhil, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, sort of maybe the one word answer is money and collaborators, but no, I think sort of the impression of academia is that it's like ivory tower, we just sort of are enclosed. But I think sort of what's super exciting, what a lot of especially junior people now are working on, is like, how do we sort of take all of this algorithmic development and especially apply it to nonprofit settings or governmental settings or other low resource settings, exactly like Allison was saying, that sort of, you know, for I think the obvious reasons don't get as much attention from big companies. And so sort of, I think part of that is sort of you end up needing to build in-house, like build products and maintain products in-house. And so that just, you know, becomes like sort of the two things needed for that are often, you know, money to pay the developers and maintain the developers and things like that. And then sort of collaborators on the other side and nonprofits or sort of in government who are willing to work with you and sort of do these things.
All right. So you need elected officials to be smart enough to care about this stuff and emerging technology and how it affects government and interaction with the people and the problems of their cities. That's easy enough, right? Give them a call. They're always at the ready. Allison, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar to Nikhil's, but maybe one step further is I love working with students. I think they are a lot of what drives our research forward. But there are two blockers on my working with students. One is having enough time. So if anyone can give me time, that would be fantastic. The other one though is resources, right? Because I don't want to be in a position where I am having students do these like unpaid internships, because that just increases disparities between who has the resources to do an unpaid internship instead of a paid job. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do as part of my research agenda is incorporating more students into these projects and paying them a fair wage.
Okay, so anyone listening want to sponsor student research jobs, maybe their company wants to donate and have it named for themselves or their company. The official name we can talk about later. But yeah, again, if you put your contact in that chat, someone from the program can connect it and reach out on your behalf and make some good Cornell connections. Thank you all so much for doing this. I learned a ton. I'm ready to go do some deep dives on some of this stuff, particularly the wine, but the other stuff too. Just so awesome to see Cornellians doing such great good, especially ones that went to Stanford and decided Cornell was a better place to be for their teaching, and not for the weather. So thank you so much to all of you for joining. Congrats to all 7 of the Forbes 30 under 30 Cornellians, and thanks to everybody who watched and participated. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah.